The workshop order.
So property tax 101. Andy,
Oh, you want me to do it? Sure.
you put it together, I think you can best explain it.
So, had some conversations with some people in the community, they were a little concerned about the way the general fund 3% increase was stated, in that truth and taxation meeting. They didn't think that it, was as clear as it probably should have been, as far as that it was not only the 3% increase in the general fund, but also that there was a, for the first time in recent Medelia history, there was a debt service payments to the tune of almost 75,000. I got the number here, 74,870.31 in debt service that was also levied against the taxpayer. So then we kinda dug into that a little bit and recalled exactly what that debt service is about, and we'll talk about that a little later. But the combination of the 3% increase in general fund tax levy and then the, debt service payment increased the overall tax burden on the community from, in city taxes alone, from, $563,937 to $651,146, and it was roughly 15.4%. So, kind of get into why those, increases were made. The 3% general fund levy increase was basically inflation style increase that was associated with the increased cost of goods and services provided by the city forces. The debt service increase, which is a debt service increase that we haven't had in the past, was, new, was basically for two projects. The first project and the time frame for that decision was 2018, when we decided, after the street shop was lost to a fire, that we were going to rebuild the street shop and at the same time add cold storage in the second building. Now at that time, like I said, 2018, and everybody in this room and the council at the time, we were all discussing, should we just get it all done at once? There was a slight shortfall. I don't remember, Chris, exactly what that amount was. I know there was some inconsistency with the coverage, and they didn't want to pay for a new slab, and they didn't want to, pay for some other things that were, so there was gonna be a shortfall in rebuilding that building anyway, and that's kind of why we decided to do all the footings and grading and build both buildings at the same time. That project wasn't met with much, resistance, I don't think, at the time. There was public hearings on it, there was a lot of discussion on what we should do and if we should take on that debt. And maybe you can describe a little bit as to why that didn't show up in last year's.
It actually,
Cause didn't we prepay or paid for, got
Yep.
levied for it a year in advance?
We levied for that a year in advance, and we levied for it 1 year too early. So what happened is we levied for the only 25,000, and then we only levied for 4,000 to balance it out, and now the new payment is this year's. Well, the 74,000 has two projects on it, so it's two bonds put together.
Right. But there was basically a prepayment, so that's why you might have seen a bigger jump from last year to this year, is because there was nothing levied last year for that project. 4,000.
Yeah.
For that project, so it was pretty minimal. So, the second project, not the, the street garage and cold storage, the second project was the 2020 street reconstruction, the block of 2nd Street Northeast and the block of 5th Street Southeast. Now, when we originally discussed and brought those projects up, they were gonna be included with the West Main Joy Avenue project, and we were gonna try to get the best, most competitive bid possible. We were gonna try to package everything together. It was after the county backed out and postponed the West Main Joy Avenue project that we decided to still go ahead because of the sagging sewer on Fifth Street Southeast was a actual issue, and then, come to find out that there was a redundant water line, but there was also a block of internal gravel that was a maintenance problem too, so. Both of those projects were deemed, by city staff, by the comp plan, by the city engineer as priority projects, so we went ahead with both of those projects. So,
Jim, do you want a copy of that?
so some context for those decisions, like I said, they were both decisions were made, in one case 3 years ago, in the other case 2 years ago. I think that both those decisions were made with the city was in good financial position. The city had low to no debt in the case of the street shop cold storage. Bond interest was very low, and the project was deemed a need. With the street projects, we were in a similar position. We're, even to this day, I think our bond rating and everything can speak for itself, but we're, in a good financial position, still have, low debt, bond interest at a 40-year low according to, our bond advisor. And, the last two street projects were deemed a high priority because of the sagging sewer and the internal block of gravel that was a maintenance concern. So, on the next slide, you kinda go through and you can see the amount the city levied versus the estimated tax value of Madelia and the taxable market value of Madelia. So, when you compare all those numbers, you can kind of figure out by dividing the amount the city levies in taxes versus the taxable market value, exactly how much every taxpayer is paying roughly per thousand. And this is an average across all, tax classes, and it's, rough numbers, but it's kind of an easy number to compare other cities and communities against, as well as our historical numbers against. So that next slide has a breakdown of what a Madelia taxpayer is paying in city taxes per thousand of taxable market value over the last 11 years. And as you can see, due to the, downturn and the devaluing, and I don't know how much of this, for instance, in 2016, 2017 was by homestead, tax exclusion, how much impact that had, how much impact the market downturn had. There's thousands of different possibilities depending on which particular possibility or property you're talking about, but as an overall average of what we've been paying and what we're currently paying, you can see that in 2016, because of the lower tax value, we were paying close to $9 a thousand for city taxes. Now, as the tax value went up and the number went up, it kind of leveled out, and I would say that, 2018, you can see that the taxable market value rebounded to, $83 million and change, where the levy hadn't really increased to the level it's at today, so we were back down to $6.50 a thousand. Now, in the last 2 years, our taxable market value and our estimated market values are, growing to kind of show that the real estate market and growth and all that stuff is there. And then you look at how much we're paying per thousand, and in 2020 we're at $738. 2021, after the, general fund levy increase of 3% and taking on the debt service, you're at 766. So what that really means is, basically the increase of 28 cents, if you take that and times it by a household or a personal property that's worth $100,000, that person should have seen about a $28 increase per 100,000 on their property taxes, just due to the decision we made when we added the debt service. Now, what has to be realized about that too is, it isn't like you didn't get anything. I mean, it isn't like you got good, there's tangible assets returned for that, the two blocks of reconstruction and, the street shop and cold storage. Those assets also add to the value of the city and the city's, overall assets. So on the next slide, if you take a look at, how we compare, and these are all 2020 numbers because I didn't have access to the 2021 numbers for everybody. I got these from the state website. So if you look, I mean, yeah, we're maybe higher than, Nicollet and Lake Crystal by a touch, but we're realistically, kind of in the ballpark of everybody else in the neighborhood. You can see the larger communities really do fluctuate depending on how diverse their tax base is and, what they probably have. You look at St. Peter and Mankato, even New Ulm to some extent, all those have college campuses in city limits, all those have, college housing and a bunch of other stuff that, would drive that tax base down. Even Fairmont with lakeside properties and some other properties, there's different values in place there. So that's kind of what I came up with as far as, how everything looks compared to other communities around. Now, when you, kind of look at all that, I don't know if we're fully all aligned or not, but I think it's good. Like, if you would've asked me 3 weeks ago, what is the tax value of Madelia done in the last 10 years, I would've told you probably grown throughout, or at least post, fire and post 2016, I would've thought we had a pretty strong growth because there's been a lot of projects, there's been a lot of, money kind of added by the EDA to the community, and there's been a lot of interest and a lot of people, trying to rejuvenate and trying to build a community. So, kind of moving on, we had, maybe some steps that we can look at in this room as far as keeping all those numbers in check, and ways to do it. Look at controlling that debt service payment and, having everybody that's making those decisions know the type of impact it's gonna have on the tax burden of the community. Encourage growth through development of properties in the city and additional new properties through the annexation process if possible. I think, we'll have to continue to encourage that process if possible. Look for outside funding sources at the county, state, and federal level to take on some of these, especially infrastructure projects. And those things that are, maybe less year to year and more hopefully for 40 to 50 years at a time. And then, work with the county assessor's office to make sure that, they're getting the information they need to make fair and accurate assessments. So, as part of this research and putting this information together, I reached out to the Department of Revenue Property Tax Division by email. Was in contact with a couple of their staff members up there. They kind of pointed me at a bunch of the, the state level recorded data for Watonwan County and for Madelia and for, St. James and the area. And they also have interactive, you can look up basically any county, any city, anything you want as far as, you know, sales ratio studies and all this other stuff, if you really wanna dive into it. Some of the things that were slightly disappointing when I contacted them is there's basically two numbers in the sales ratio report that speaks to how accurate the assessments and how well the assessments are gauging the market, for Madelia, for Watonwan County, so on and so forth. And that's this, COD, which is the coefficient of dispersion, and then the, PRD number, which is the price-related differential. The only problem is we didn't have enough sales in Madelia to reach the threshold to report those numbers. So I reached out to the county assessor to see if they could either give me a number for the year that we didn't, the sales, ratio report that we didn't reach it. We had 28 sales, the threshold was 30. So I haven't got that number yet to see how good the assessments in town really are, and I don't know if I'll necessarily get it without necessarily maybe tracking down the numbers and figuring it out myself. I don't know, but those two numbers would really speak to how well the assessor's office has done in recent history as far as gauging the market. If they are missing the market, are they missing it on the low side or the high side? And like I said, there wasn't enough sales to report those numbers, and I haven't got them from Maggie yet either, but I have requested them, so if I do get them, I'll pass them along. I did meet with the county assessor and county auditor last Thursday afternoon. I had a discussion with them kind of about, mainly what was seen on the slide where we had, the taxable market value versus city levy and those numbers over the last 10 years. I was really looking for more, historical information as to what might have driven that number downward and now rebounding, and what to expect on the, upcoming years as far as from a planning process, as far as, are we actually growing? Is it gonna continue to grow? Is our tax base growing like all the indicators might say they are? And, I didn't necessarily get, any strong answers there as far as what they were willing to say or weren't willing to say as far as previous tax cycles or taxation cycles. They did give me some information. Madelia itself is on a 20% per year property reassessment, so it would mean for the entire city of Madelia, it would take 5 years for every property in town to get reassessed. So that means that in that 11-year period that was shown on the one graph, there was only 2 assessment cycles. So if there was one to screw it up and one to try to get it back to normal, that's probably a 10-year process. I can't necessarily speak to exactly how that is going. I did ask about why are properties not reassessed at the price they're sold at. Maggie, the county assessor, basically told me that it is illegal in this state to chase sales or to reevaluate properties after the sale, unless it is part of the 20% that's up for assessment that year. So that, I guess, is the short answer. She said it was not lawful to chase sales and to reassess properties as they're sold. And I can't speak to that if it's not lawful or not. I would assume it's not. So the assessor did mention a couple of things that, hopefully should help. They mentioned that since Maggie took over in that position 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, she's recreated manuals and documents to make assessments more accurate moving forward. She believes that the assessments will start better reflecting current market conditions. She said she's already had to make some adjustments, and you probably saw those on your tax statements, two market values to better reflect the current market condition. They both encouraged me to let any taxpayers that had any questions know that they should contact them directly on particular properties for reassessment, or if they have questions as to why their value is where it's at, or how taxation at the county level works. And they both said that they were very willing to answer any questions from the community and everybody else. So, you know, I guess I can encourage people, especially with our, Board of Equalization and what is the actual title of that meeting on the floor? Taxation and Equalization?
No, it's Board of Equalization, right,
That's the name of it?
yep,
So with that meeting coming up, on the fourth,
on the third,
on the third,
at 6 o'clock,
I guess if you
Council
have
meeting.
specific questions
next
about
Monday.
your properties.
Next Monday.
it's Monday.
If you have specific questions about your properties, I would reach out in advance to Chris or to Maggie or the county, and so they can at least have those records if you're gonna show up for that meeting here, so they can talk about them.
And that meeting's next Monday at 6, correct?
Is that 6?
Mm-hmm.
But in doing the research and looking at, you know, the actual numbers and, you know, the city levy's gone up, you know, especially with a 15% increase this last year. But overall, over the last 11 years, it's a 28% increase from 2010. So 2.5% a year, but yeah, we took a big jump because of the debt service. Now, the county assessor and county auditor both said that having that debt service separate is probably a better idea and is more common practice, because it isn't necessarily associated with the general levy, and because it's a short term, it more reflects the actual taxpayers that are paying for the term of the, you know, I guess that's kinda how they posed it. I don't disagree with that. I think that there's a level of debt service that we should probably be carrying, especially at these interest rates. I don't know what that level is that everybody in town would be comfortable with, but I think at these current interest rates, it's dumb not to have, you know, something borrowed. I mean, you're talking a 40-year low in bond interest.
It's not only that, Andy, it's having that, if we always keep it at that 74,000, once a bond is gonna go off, you should already planning to put another bond on at the same rate. So it always stays the same, and never goes up in the peaks and the valleys. So,
And I don't disagree with that. I mean, it would allow you to plan for future projects and for, I mean, you'll know the exact date of when you'll have that spending.
but you shouldn't back into your general fund to take care of your debt service.
Yeah, I don't think that's common practice anywhere anymore from the sounds of it, so.
So,
But it still has to be recorded somewhere for the taxpayers on the tax statement,
yeah, it was always recorded as debt service, but.
except we didn't have any debt, so then
But
it
what you
wasn't.
guys did is, if you had a levy of, say, 500 some thousand, if you had a debt service of, say, 50,000, you backed into it, so your general levy went down 450,000, so you could take care of your $50,000 debt. So you always maintain a certain level, but you also just cheated yourself out of $50,000 of operating costs on your general fund. So what you need to do is keep your general levy at the same and your debt service at the same, and leave them alone. And then just ride.
But what you're saying is, you know, 70 to 75,000 debt service, but the general levy to match inflation, you're maybe looking at a 3% increase, you know, or a 2.5 to 3% increase when justified moving forward to keep up with inflation.
But as soon as that, those, so these two bonds are set at a 10-year. So
10 year?
10-year, they're really short. So we should already be planning for what's gonna happen once those fall off to get a new one, but keep that same amount. Don't ever change that amount. Make sure when you do the next project, you figure it out so you can maintain that certain payment. So it doesn't go up and down, it stays the same.
Right.
And that's the whole purpose of that, so you can continually improve. If you don't have that line item, you don't have the ability to improve. And that's why things have been put on hold.
No, I guess I don't disagree with that. I mean, I know for a fact that we're a lot closer to the end of the life cycle of a lot of infrastructure in town than, you know, we were 20 years ago. Definitely than, you know, there's gonna be things that are gonna have to be replaced at some point. And not necessarily out of, I mean, I don't wanna necessarily take on projects that don't need to be taken on at the time they need to be taken on. But what I'm saying is, we have a list of priority projects already specified by the city engineer and spelled out in the comp plan. If we can use those projects with the debt service and move forward with those projects, it's gonna have to, you know, happen at some point.
So, just to give you an idea, okay, so if the Main and Joy Avenue project does go through, the call date on the bonds that are current is right about that time.
Okay.
So if you take on that project, you're gonna pay off the other bonds to bring on that Joy and
West
Main
Main.
project. So it should correlate with everything so just boom, 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 and it shouldn't have that big of an impact.
And maybe the biggest, you know, in my mind, I had no idea, because we hadn't had it in the past, what the debt service would look like. And because I don't know what the taxable market value of the city is gonna be from year to year, I really don't know how that equates when it's equalized out versus what we're.
And so when we go into budget, they're only giving me projections of what next year's gonna bring. So when we do budget in August, we'll do those equations like Andy did, so you kinda understand, but things can change.
Right.
We just need everybody to understand that where we think we know where we're at and we think we're okay.
Great, but I think this number is a lot easier to understand if it's so much per thousand. If I know that, you know, the Vidalia city taxes is gonna be between $7.50 and $8 per thousand, I can, you know, justify that if we're getting the resources and getting the services that we need. The other thing that we've had this discussion multiple times in the last 5 years is this budget looks totally different and this tax levy looks totally different if you take two, you know, elephant in the room amenities away from this community. If you take the golf course and the pool out of the equation,
That's huge.
you're talking about probably $6 a thousand or $5.50 a thousand. So, and we've had those discussions multiple times as to when is too much, and when is, but that's, you know, that's up to the community too, that's not up to just, cause you take those things away and that's when this room is packed and the upstairs is packed, so.
Yeah, and that's about a 50-50 split, no matter what you do there.
Yeah, pretty much.
You know, there's just as many for it as
Yeah.
against it, and
Well, we all know that the swimming pool, if we're lucky, we'll get 10 more years.
Right.
I'm crossing my fingers, you know, we just sandblasted it and we're going to be repainting it, but, we're already past the time that is on one of those kind of pools. So we're hoping that we can get another 10 years out of it. But at that point, then the community will have to decide if, reinvesting in another pool or doing something like that is what they wanna do.
question?
So what is the council looking for in the sense of the future? What particular increases or percentages are we looking for going forward? I know you don't have all the numbers, but we're already a quarter of, or a third of the way through the year.
I would say keeping debt service similar to where it's at, like Chris
Yeah.
said, with knowing that Joy and West Main are on the horizon, and we'll have a call date for those, you know, so we can keep that at a similar level, and I would say that an inflation increase periodically, you know, every year or every 2 years on the general fund of what, 1 to 3%
at the most.
is probably what we're gonna be looking at, but we'll have to start doing a better job of, you know, long-term planning as far as, we know that infrastructure is gonna fail, we know that we're gonna have those projects, and we have to be ready to rock and roll when those, you know, call dates come and we can pay stuff off and get a new project under our belt. We should be ready and have it shovel ready too, so. I, like I said, I don't wanna do stuff just for the sake of doing it either. I want, you know, I want there to be need, and I think we've identified, you know, what, probably still a half a dozen projects that are on the hot list as far as what should be done to correct actual issues that are out in the field now. But the thing is, we'll have to kinda determine how much we can take on at a time to keep that debt service at about the same amount. I would say if we keep the debt service and the general levy the same and continue to grow, then the community should start seeing some benefits from that growth too. I, reached out to Medelia Light and Power in this same 10-year period that, you know, we fluctuated in tax value. We added roughly about 10% more customers to the, you know, electric meter wise. I don't know if you had any numbers that speak to growth as far as parcel numbers or meter numbers on the water level, but, you know, there is some growth. It's not, you know, super dramatic of 150 customers over 10 years or 180 customers over 10 years, but it's still a sign of growth and not a sign of regression, so we should start seeing, I asked.
But growth shouldn't cost us
No,
more, and that's what a lot of this reflects,
Right.
is our slow growth is essentially
Right.
costing us more than it should.
so I asked the auditors, you know, I asked them about with the Tony Downs expansion and with the Vandenberg Food Building expansion, and, you know, we're going through some headaches and going through some growing pains as far as pulling off the logistics of those two projects and pulling off the logistics of that company's growth. I asked them, you know, when will that be reflected in our actual tax base as far as adding that to the growth of the community, and, you know, they definitely said they'd add it to the list as far as looking at them, you know, as they're completed or as they're, you know, worked on. There's new construction at both facilities, so hopefully they can, and I don't know if they have a commercial assessment person that can come in and actually tour the plants and get a good idea for the actual value of those properties, but, you know, a lot of that too comes back to how do we know the properties in town are getting estimated at the, you know, at the levels they should be, and making sure that everybody's paying their fair share. And I'm not saying that anybody's not, but when you start pulling up properties on Beacon, it's hard to justify, you know, certain properties at one level and others at another, and maybe we're 2 years from those being reassessed at the proper level, and maybe we're a year away, I don't know, but you know, I will definitely continue to, if I see stuff that doesn't look right, I'm gonna pass it along to Maggie and say, I don't know what's going on with this property, I'd like to know what's driving this, you know, assessment. And it's not necessarily to turn in, you know, people that are getting a deal on their taxes, but realistically, I think it makes the whole community stronger if everything's as close to market value, you know, true market value.
Straight across the board.
Right.
Throughout, and if it takes 5 years, then it really takes 10.
Right, yeah. And that's kind of the point that I don't know how to, without approaching the Board of Assessors or somebody and saying, hey, I don't know if all these assessments are right, or I don't know what's going on. How do we just look into what's going on and how long is it gonna take to get it so it's where it is, you know, where it's supposed to be? I have no idea, but I'm more than willing to look into it further, you know, for everybody, so. And I have no problems, you know, reaching out at the state level or whatever to see and make sure that the proper procedures and proper, you know, methods are in place to hopefully get us, you know, as close to those true market values as possible too. But I think that, and they talked a lot about, I don't know if they didn't wanna admit any, any mistakes in the past, they didn't wanna talk about necessarily the assessments of the past, but when they tell me that they've redone all their methods and redone all their procedures in the last couple of years, and then done market adjustments to get property values in Adelia closer to true market value, that leads me to believe that maybe the things in the past weren't done correctly.
But I think that's what the guy in the past said too, oh yeah, we redid.
Right,
we redid
right,
everything.
because his way was right.
So, that's what I'm saying, we've
But-
been down.
That's
the
been a
same
broken
process.
record
Yeah.
for 10 years.
Well,
Absolutely.
and
Serious.
we've had the same conversations at that board of, equalization.
Everybody's blaming the person before it.
Right,
We've had
And
the
we're
same
on our third
conversations.
assessor in
well,
10
that's what I'm
years.
saying, it's, well, that guy had it messed up, and then the next guy had it messed up, and now the last hit. So is this one right?
I can't speak to that either, cause I
I guess we'll
don't.
see in 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know how to get around that,
Right.
can you approach somebody, or can you go to the county as a, mayor, as the council and say, I want every property in this town reassessed and, market value reestablished? I don't know if that's even a possibility, I don't know, we'd have to.
There isn't
determine.
enough manpower to do it.
Yeah, I don't know.
They don't have enough people to.
No, and I get
Yeah.
that, and if they can adjust to sale prices, and then, they're using those sales to adjust everybody's price, but not the particular prices that properties that they sold until the year they come up on assessment, which might be 5 years from the date of sale, or might be 2 years, or 3 years, or whatever.
It'd be nice that it didn't take 30 sales, because that's not realistic for
Well,
a
right.
small
And
town to get your.
It would be nice to have a good look at what those looking at even the memo that Maggie sent out, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, you can look through that sales list, and there is some, sales and estimated market values that are off by 65%.
Yeah.
Now, that tells me that person was either getting a hell of a deal or not getting a real good deal, depending on what side of the ledger they were on for their taxes since the last time they were assessed.
But, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that affects us on the county, if it's not assessed properly.
affects everybody.
Well, yeah, everybody. But, when you're asking for $600,000 or $700,000 in the city of Adelia, these assessments don't matter within the boundaries, it's just a shell game for all of us, right? I mean, take my hat off, you're trying to get it equal for everybody and fair. But that number doesn't change within the city of Adelia, does it, Chris? If you ask for $700,000, it doesn't matter what our assessments are, it's gonna get divided up within the boundary of the city of Adelia, right?
Depends if you're appraised out higher, if your taxable
Within the city.
value is correct, and I got a feeling about 30% aren't in this city.
So the
And I
number,
think that's conservative.
the number is the same for
I think it's
the
been a
city
failure.
as a whole, but it
Total
totally,
And I
it
take my
totally.
hat off to you for wanting to get this done, I just wanted to make sure that in the future, and I made this certain with the county too, if we say it's 3% at the truth in taxation, that's what we're levying. I know these games all go on, but, and I know you didn't realize the debt service would have that much impact.
And I apologize if I didn't state it right within that truth and taxation meeting in regards to the increase on the general levy and the debt service levy. So obviously in years to come, I will always present this as the general levy and then the debt service levy. So I will say if there is an increase or no increase in the debt service, or increase or no increase or decrease in the general, I will keep them separate, so they are stated and printed in two separate things.
So.
We shouldn't have any change, I mean, if we look at going forward, just like Matt
I
was
don't
talking this year,
want
I
to
don't see,
change.
we're gonna have that debt service at the same number.
Should just be.
That shouldn't change from here on out,
It
ever.
doesn't change, just list it so the rest of the residents say, hey, okay, we've got the general fund levy and we've got the debt service, they should be listed as two components.
And when you
So
combine
it's-
the two, makes it a
That
levy
makes it-
at,
right.
But we
$7
won't-
per,
We'll always
or
list it
$8 per
two
thousand.
separate and then the total,
Right.
just so I'm looking at Michelle, just so that we'll have it all laid out.
And
Okay.
when you're getting back to infrastructure, does anybody ever lobby to Julie Rosen and Munson about the one we have bonding years? That's all, I didn't realize that's all these little towns do it. It's about 75% you get paid for by the state.
You go up and talk to Julie
You
about,
try
but
to
it
get-
has to be like a shovel-ready
You
project.
try to get.
So let's go back to what I'm already setting you guys up for. Let's start getting the project ready. If that thing's shovel-ready, then I should be up at the Capitol trying to lobby to get money for that project. We
Yeah.
have to get the projects all set up, so when I have something to go up there to lobby for.
If we could get the infrastructure and the streets smooth again for 25% on the dollar, you'd be
I'm,
foolish not to. I might even go back to drinking instead of beer.
but Jim, it goes back to the whole thing that I'm trying to lay out for you guys is.
But part of that bonding and getting those funds, you pretty much have to have it spelled out in the comp plan, you have to have,
Yes.
you know, all that back end paperwork and until the, you know, Region 9 stuff and all this other stuff happened in the recent future, we didn't have, you know, an up-to-date comp plan or a, you know, a
We've
list.
always had one. Jane didn't, somebody didn't know where it was.
Well,
He did one in all
It
stuff.
wasn't,
He
it
did one in
wasn't
all
up,
stuff.
it definitely wasn't up to
Wasn't
date. though.
updated, so,
Yeah, it hadn't,
I
it hadn't
mean,
been updated, yeah.
And it got updated after the fire again.
He did one in all
So,
stuff.
there is a,
But
yeah,
the
the
one
fire,
previous to that was 1965, and no one
Yeah.
could find the 07 one, but it was done.
Right,
but the CIP, the capital improvement plan is constantly changed. And obviously, we saw that with the Joy and West Main, project, because obviously Fifth Street, we didn't know it was a sagging sewer. And so that had to be put on right away, you know? It's constantly changing, but you have to have that CIP there all the time. And so I got you guys set up for the 74,000 for the debt service, so we start planning. That CIP is constantly changing, you know what projects you're gonna have, where you need to go. So when those opportunities come available at the Capitol, I have something to talk about. I can go up there and I say, I got this project, that project, this project, what can you do for us? If
right,
we
and then
don't
we can
go
also.
through all of that and get that plan, then there's nothing for me to go up there for.
We can also leverage that debt service into, you know, bigger projects if we can
Yep.
receive those bond, you know,
Yep, so
bond
if we
funding.
get the bond payments, we can increase it, but it's already ready, shovel ready, or to a point that I can talk about it, and we can go for what we need.
And the other thing, you know, after listening to Munson, at our last meeting, the one thing he made really clear is that it has to be through, the other way. We went on the open market versus the, government market.
State, yeah.
Because if you go on the open market, then you don't have to pay the Davis-Bacon wage.
That is once in a lifetime. Honestly, we didn't know that the interest rates were gonna be like that. I mean, I agree with Munson when he says the PFA is the right way to go. Yeah, for many, many years, the PFA was the right way to go at a 1.5 interest rate, but when you have a market we signed at 1.8, you know, and then we don't have to buy American steel, or we don't have to do prevailing wages, which cuts it down, so that little bit of interest, extra interest, actually, it's kind of a wash. But I don't know if that'll ever happen again, so you guys really got a great opportunity there, so.
So I mean, I don't know if there's a easy solution. You go over to the county's office, they'll tell you it's complicated. You know, that was their answer. It's a complicated formula, it's complicated. Every property has its individual circumstances, and I'm sure that's the case, but if it's gonna take 10 years to get it straightened out, does that mean I have to go into that assessor's office every year for 10 years, or for as long as I'm on the board, and say, what's going on with these properties this year? Is that our responsibility to stay on top of their assessments? I don't know. I don't know, you know. I don't even necessarily know if they're wrong. I just want them to be justified from time to time to, you know, I showed them a piece of commercial, empty lot, commercial real estate that was valued at 23.8, was purchased for 30,000, and the following year it was assessed at 10.3.
which is less than what my property is behind my house. And now I pay more taxes for a postage stamp and the Mac property.
Right, so I have no idea why that, you know, and if it's actually market adjustments, or if it's actually, does that have to do with other commercial vacant properties sold throughout the county that uses for that adjustment? Or is that just Madelia commercial vacant land that was used to, you know, manipulate that market? Manipulate that estimated market value? I have no idea, and they didn't really have specific answers for me either, but I don't, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you pull it up, and that's the other thing that I tried to get across to them too, is I said, you know, all this information is public, it's all on Beacon, everybody can see it. That's why you're getting, you know, a lot of the questions is because they don't have to go and ask their neighbor what they're paying for taxes. They can look, they don't have to, you know, talk to anybody in the bar, they can look and see exactly what everybody else is paying. And it's frustrating when you start doing that, even if you don't have all the answers, or especially if you don't. So, I don't know what the easy solution is. I think in this room, we can work to maintain the level of taxation and hope that, you know, the growth of this community helps with that burden. And we'll do the things that we need to do to hopefully grow the community moving forward.
Well, that's all we can do is, as the council, we
Right.
just have to try, you know, we don't have no control of the county, we have no control of the state, but we
Yep.
have to do to keep it affordable
Yep.
for the residents here, and as we have increased, that should flatten out and
Mhm.
lessen the tax burden
It should.
over time, if the complicated equation is
Doesn't
right.
get more complicated,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, there's 40 types of, properties in the state of Minnesota, so. And a lot of those are judgment calls.
Yeah, I don't know if there's an easy answer. I think we can move forward and do the things that we're talking about as far as, you know, controlling that debt and
Yeah.
debt service and
And
having an actual, you know, budgetary reason to adjust for inflation upward. And, you know, we make a lot of those decisions during budget time that it's not like we're spending loosey-goosey on
And I think
things.
back to the budget time, like during August and stuff, when we start having our budget meetings, I think there's gonna be more equations put into place than before. So now that you guys understand the 738 per 1,000, we'll try to,
And that's a generic number, but I think it's a good number to compare to other communities and kind of as a status benchmark to figure out where we are and what we might look.
but let me throw in this though, that just say that 738 stays 738, but your property just got reassessed, or,
Right.
and it increased like, say, $20,000.
Oh, yeah,
We
you're
didn't change anything, but since
You're
it
paying more,
increased,
yeah.
you're gonna pay more, that's what I think people have to understand.
Not for the city of Adelia though.
For the city's portion.
For the city's portion, that
The
shouldn't change.
city's portion is always 30, I think it's like 30, 38, 30, whatever.
But if the valuation changes, that shouldn't change the city portion, right?
The valuation changes, it'll change how much, if your value goes up.
If your value, but within the city limits, that 700,000 doesn't become 740,000, it stays
No.
700,000.
No.
No,
It's still
not without,
No.
not without a
Yeah.
levy increase, no.
Yep,
Right, that stays the same, and then
County and
somebody
school
gets a
district will
better
change.
deal,
County
and
and
somebody
school
else
district.
pays more.
County and school district will change drastically if the rest of the county doesn't go up.
but what I'm just saying is like, if your value goes up, that could increase your taxes, even though that we kept it at the same, yeah. And then I saw, on some of them, like that.
Or if your value goes down, then your taxes, should go down,
If we keep it the same,
if we keep it all the same.
on the city side, sorry, you're right, on the city side,
On
the
the
other
city
ones
side.
could.
We can't control the
fluctuate.
state, we can't control the county, we can't control the school district.
But yeah, we'll just add more more equations in there and so.
Maybe
people
just in the
understand.
projection side, just so we kinda know what the status quo
Yep.
looks like, or what it compared to, you know, moving forward.
I think that would be, beneficial to everybody to understand the impact and how we're gonna move forward.
Do I still have to, do I have time for the chief yet for 6 o'clock workshop?
I don't know, I had like
Yeah.
4 pages of stuff, but I can trim it down. I only got 10 minutes.
I know.
Does anybody wanna listen to me ramble on? I'll just be brief and I'll kinda cut through all the stuff I got on here. My goal was to just kind of let you know where things were at. We don't have a resignation letter from Officer Martin yet, but he did get a psychological evaluation done, and his physical and drug screening is gonna be this week, so he's basically told me he's got a resignation letter sitting in his desk, he's just waiting for the official green light, so it's more likely than not we're gonna be losing him. As of this morning, there's 35 agencies, not including requests for court deputies, transport deputies, or police chief positions around the state that are currently looking for officers. Most of the recent postings have deadlines that are extended out to the end of June or beginning of August at this point, which means that instead of opening applications and holding them for about 3 weeks, most agencies at this point are sitting at about 3 months that you leave a application process open to try and get people to apply. There's not a huge secret out right now that there's obviously a huge shortage of qualified applicants that's been on a slow decline for many years. And our agency as a whole has basically been struggling with turnover pretty much every other year or every year. The only stretch since I became chief in 2011 that we actually had an officer or a full staff department for more than 2 years was 2017 to 2018. Other than that, we've basically been dealing with running short in one part of the year or the other. When I started back in 2000, I was one of 2 people hired out of about 80 or 90 applicants. Last year, Colin was hired from a known agency and a trusted colleague out of 4 applicants. The lack of quality applicants is not obviously isolated to law enforcement right now, but with all the stuff that's going on in the news, it's accelerated, and other options for employment out there, obviously, law enforcement is not a prime choice. So I have to say that in the 20 years I've been doing this, this is probably the most dire I've ever seen it. I don't expect it to get a lot better. The use of force requirements have recently changed that make a lot of questions as to what we can or cannot do. They're going to require a lot of training to try and address it. It's opened up a lot of question marks. We have a lot of mental health and suicidal calls right now, and that's probably the area of the biggest question marks that we're dealing with. When I get a call from dispatch at night and my officer is headed over to Louisville to help with a suicidal person, the only thing I can think of in the back of my mind is I hope that nothing happens with this case, because the use of force, requirements that have been put in place don't really allow you to do anything at this point in time. Once you step inside their house, if they are only a danger to themselves and they change their mind at a moment's notice and decide to come at you with a knife or a gun, if you get into a use of force situation with that, there's a 3-part test that they're trying to use, and it's very confusing, and there's a lot of questions as to whether or not that's going to be a justified use of force anymore. Same thing with somebody that's, if you're chasing somebody down an alley, they turn and take a shooting stance with their cell phone, and you fire thinking they're going to be pointing a gun at you, and it turns out they're not. There's questions whether or not that's going to be a justified use of force. So there's a lot of unanswered questions right now as to where things are going, and I think it's making people nervous and going into law enforcement. And obviously, after last week, the governor's mentioned that they're looking at more legislation coming down the pike. I think that's going to make things even more questionable. So I'm just going to skip down like I said, I'll skip down my list here. I just wanted to kind of go into some of these things. Like I said, what does this mean for us? It just means that we may be responding to less types of calls in the future, less mental health, less suicidal calls, things like that. We may just simply be pulled out of it. That legislation, hasn't been completely determined yet, but I think they're wanting to have that handled by more mental health experts, crisis experts, which is all well and good in the metro area where they may have some of that more readily available to respond. Out here in the boonies, we're basically left holding the bag, trying to figure out how we're gonna make that happen. So we're not gonna be any different than any other community. A lot of this legislation that comes through, dealing with issues that happen in the metro departments trickles down to us. So a lot of the trainings that we have on de-escalation techniques and things like that are a result of actions that were taken up, in larger metropolitan areas. And I'm not gonna mention any specific city by name, but you can probably figure out which one I'm talking about. But that all comes down to us. And as great as that training is, a lot of us down here have to deal with de-escalation techniques all the time because we know that our backup is 15 to 20 minutes away. So we spend a lot more time talking to people rather than just taking action, which, they don't do in some of these larger agencies, which is probably why they have so many more use of force incidents. So, like I said, I'm just gonna skip through a lot of this. What do we do here in the future, knowing that we're probably not gonna have officers available to us? We can do nothing and see where it goes. Another option is we can start looking into reestablishing that 5th full-time officer. Minimizes the impact of each loss that we're dealing with. Provides additional coverage overnight and a permanent call car available during the day. City of Sleepy Eye has 7 full-time officers, slightly larger than us. City of Springfield has 5 full-time officers, slightly lower than us. St. James now has 8 full-time officers, and Lake Crystal has 3, which is basically overseen by a sheriff's office of 35 deputies. Obviously, the biggest issue is that it's going to add $100,000 to our budget each year, and there's no guarantees that there's any officers out there to fill that position either. So another option is to explore folding the police department at some point down the road and merging with the sheriff's office. That means the staffing would no longer be the city's problem. Your coverage is through the additional deputies. It may be the only option if staffing shortages continue statewide. The cost to you will probably be about the same. You'll lose your local control. No ordinance enforcement will happen, so you'll have to hire that out. And it's pretty much a guarantee you will never see a uniform at a city council meeting unless you specifically request it, or if they show up to discuss your budget and how much more money they're going to need. So there's pluses and minuses to everything. All I can tell you is that right now, it's extremely stressful, and I'm not sure what we're going to do. I don't foresee us having a full department until the end of the year at this point, where we're fully trained in and back to normal. I think that's probably a realistic expectation. So where we used to sit in about a 6-month period of time, we're probably looking at about a full year. We never know until we get the application process open, but I'm talking to the other police chiefs out there, and I'm telling you right now, it's one applicant, maybe a couple applicants, and we're not hiring any of those people. And I'm not gonna settle for the 28th best option out there. I want the best option here, because I believe the city deserves it, and we as a department want to make sure that we have the best people out there on the road. We don't want to put anybody out there that's going to be a problem either, or we have questions on. So I'd rather wait and see what comes in, and if it takes all year to get it, that's what we're going to do. So I think I'm out of time.
Yes, yeah.